The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual learning event, Innovative Community Engagement to Balance Budget and Priorities in Today's Economy. It's a common theme heard across local government organizations around the country, how to best strike the balance of our growing needs of our communities and prioritize our limited resources to meet these necessities while preparing for the future. How can local governments use innovation in the budget process to align their engagement efforts while advancing their strategy and vision for the future? Well, we are thrilled to host today's session showcasing the multiple award-winning work of Roseville, California, and what they've done to date to do exactly that, along with our Alliance Corporate Partner Balancing Act to talk about trends in the industry. So today we'll introduce our panelists. You'll hear their stories and expertise, basically the how of the work that they've done, and we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end and have a brief wrap-up. So as you're listening to today's presentation, please submit your questions throughout as we will moderate these questions at the end of the presentation. The highlighted yellow circle number 3 is where you can submit your questions throughout the session. Also, just a reminder that you can download all the handouts for today's session by clicking the Handouts segment of your GoToWebinar panel. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, Megan Mcpherson serves on the City Manager's Executive Team, leading public affairs, legislative, media, and community relations for the City of Roseville, California, the Capital Region's only full-service city where she's worked since 2007. She was previously with Sacramento County's Communications and Media Department, serving as their director, after spending 10 years in the private sector of public relations and advertising firms in both Hawaii and Florida. Her clients included ports and airports, travel and tourism, indigenous peoples, utilities, financial sector, and energy companies. Megan also served for 4 years as a Navy officer in Florida and Hawaii after earning a BS in journalism at Northwestern University in Chicago. Her volunteer service on nonprofit boards spans education, healthcare, economic development, youth development, and also includes a 9-year term on the National Board of Directors of Girl Scouts of the USA. Denis Kauffman is our Chief Financial Officer on our panel from the City of Roseville, California, and he is a CPA with 23 years of experience in local government financial management. Prior to his position with the City of Roseville, he served on the City of Sacramento's Finance Department for over 16 years as their Operations and Accounting Manager. Prior to joining Sacramento, he worked for a local CPA firm for 5 years specializing in audits of school districts and other local governments. Denis has a bachelor's degree in business administration with concentrations in accounting and finance, as well as a master's in public policy and administration from California State University, Sacramento. In addition to his CPA license, Denis has earned recognition from GFOA as a certified public finance officer from the Association of Government Accountants as a certified government finance manager. He's also active on many committees for the GFOA, California Society of Municipal Finance Officers, the California Municipal Treasurers Association, the California Society of Certified Public Accountants, and the League of California Cities. And then our third panelist is Chris Adams. He is the president and co-founder of Balancing Act, a Denver-based company that offers budget engagement and financial transparency tools, and was named to the GovTech 100 in 2017, 18, and 19. He is also a senior fellow at University of Colorado School of Public Affairs and an advisor to the GFOA Online Financial Transparency Task Force. Previously, he was the director of the Center for Ethics and Social Policy in Berkeley, California, and he has worked in public policy and facilitation for over 25 years. He's a graduate of Yale University and the University of Colorado, as well as the author of more than 60 published articles. So with that, I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel to our session today. Perfect, Megan. We just want to unmute you.
Thanks, Kim. This is Megan Mcpherson with the City of Roseville, and I'm going to launch right into our case study. The City of Roseville is located near Sacramento, as Kim was saying, And the way that we have our communications team structured, we have a hub and spoke model of 5 professionals within the city manager's office that work on things citywide and assist departments that don't have their own communications specialists. And these are the departments that we work with that you can see. This effort focused on our 5 biggest general fund departments, which were police, fire, parks, recreation, and libraries, public works, and development services. And we were asking the community what they valued most about those services. So the problem that we were facing was a deficit. We were looking at a $14 million plus annual shortfall to our general fund, and that's when we included capital improvement projects and infrastructure needs along with operational issues. And we've been cutting our expenditures for about 10 years before that, leading up to it. We'd done a lot of things to improve efficiencies. We had done audits. We had cut labor costs and a lot of things that basically were not visible to our community. And we were approaching a time where the cuts were going to become very visible in terms of services. So the city council asked our public affairs and communications department at one of their goals workshops to do some outreach to the community to find out what services were most important and we could concentrate the funding there. Now, as you all know, explaining municipal finance is no easy task, especially to a community that has a lot of other things to focus on. So we had some guiding principles for the effort, and that was we wanted to engage everyone. We didn't want anybody to leave this effort thinking that nobody asked me, I never had a chance to participate, I wasn't appointed to that committee, I don't have much time, I can't show up in person. So you'll see the variety of tactics we use to allow everyone a chance to weigh in. We wanted to educate because we know that once people can provide an informed opinion, it's much more likely to be taken on board and integrated into the conversation. When people offer opinions where they don't really understand different financing streams or the different restrictions we have or the different laws that compel us to do things a certain way, their input isn't as helpful because a lot of times it may be violating a policy or a law or a funding restriction. So we wanted to educate. We wanted to simplify what we were doing. Very complex concepts, we really looked at putting into a graphical form, which you'll see throughout. And then we also wanted to not only listen, but reflect back to our community that we were listening to them and what they had to say. So the key messages we were working on is that this is a problem being faced by all California cities. This is not unique to Roseville. Roseville, there wasn't fiscal mismanagement that led to this, which is often, in an age of distrust, what people go to first. We also talked about societal issues that were impacting us. So changes in consumer spending habits were reducing our revenue. We have people switch to online shopping instead of shopping in the stores. For us, means a smaller share of the tax revenues that generates. And going from purchasing goods to purchasing services also has impacted our sales tax revenue. So we talked about broader concepts that we have no control over, that the Great Recession is still an impact for us. We talked about what we'd already done to, kind of tighten our own belts. That's the first thing we were hearing from people is, well, when I have budget problems, I cut my spending. And we said, here's what we've been doing to cut spending. Now we're going to have to cut more spending. So we wanted to bring them along on the journey that we'd already been down. We did talk about pensions, and those are a very touchy issue. We didn't want to make any secret that part of the issue is pensions. It's not the whole issue by any stretch, though. And we also wanted to educate people that as much as they may say cut pensions, that's legally impossible to do in California. We also talked about the city getting a small fraction of the tax revenue. So they pay their property tax bill. We get pennies to the dollar of that. Same with sales tax. We'll show you some graphics in a second about that. And we wanted them to tell us what matters to them. Whether or not we asked, we have comment sections in every meeting and every survey. So this slide really points out how long the process takes. It's not something in terms of building community engagement and trust that you can start 6 months ahead of time and expect that you'll be successful. We really had to convince staff was working on talking to our electeds about what the problem was. And we're a community that has a large auto mall, the region's biggest shopping center. So the impression is that we have no issues whatsoever. And that's not the case. So we had to do some work talking to our leaders about what the issues are, what societal trends are, and we're also a community known for kind of addressing problems before they become big issues. So with that, laying the groundwork in the green part of this chart, we launched EngageRoseville, our community engagement effort. There was a council-appointed committee of 20 volunteers that is a Community Priorities Advisory Committee that met. Talk about that in a second. Engaged everyone, did a report to council with all the feedback. The council unanimously put that on the ballot because the community said they wanted to increase revenue instead of continue to cut services. That took us to election day, and our half-cent sales tax measure passed with 64% of the vote, which was about 9 points higher than originally thought. And we think a lot of that has to do with the engagement. So this is really everything we did in one graphic. On the bottom is the basis of awareness and education that we did. Those are all the different tactics we used. The middle part with the people is once we educated, we engaged. So we said, tell us what matters, what do you think? And we had a variety of ways to do that. And once we got that feedback, we brought that to the city council so the city council could determine next steps in terms of policy with our budget. So the first step on the education, we developed a website called EngageRoseville, and this was within our city website. And this is where we put all the information, all of the survey results, videos of our Community Priorities Advisory Committee, educational videos we made. It is still active if you want to take a look at it. And it was a very good clearinghouse of information and demonstration of transparency. We also were prepared for the opposition. So we bought this URL too, EngageRoseville. We thought in case this became something of fodder in the community, we wanted to make sure that this redirected to our EngageRoseville website, which it does. From there, the Community Priorities Advisory Committee was the first group set up. These were 20 community volunteers who met twice a month for 8 months, 2 hours at each meeting. A couple first meetings were laying the groundwork of municipal finance. And then 5 months where one department each month presented an overview of their department, and the second meeting was a ranking of priorities of services in that department. We broadcast these live on YouTube and had them archived for viewing later. So if you couldn't make it or you were interested, you could watch that. We also did in advance of each of the departments meeting. On the left, our Public Works Director is being interviewed by our communications staff. And we did a little overview. If you couldn't make it to the meeting or you didn't have 2 hours to sit and watch YouTube, you could get a little snippet of what public works services were and what some of the options were. From that, we also made podcasts, and those are available on SoundCloud and linked to from our website, and our Parks, Rec, and Library directors on the right. So we did this kind of in advance to really involve the community. So they didn't have to go to meetings or watch long meetings. They could get it in bite-sized pieces. We sent a direct mail piece out to the community. We sent 2, actually. This is the first one as part of our education that talked about how much in the 40–60% that you'll see, we have a lot of visitors and a lot of businesses here in Roseville. So we were making the point to our residents that 40% of the sales that the city residents only pay 40% of their sales taxes go to support the general fund services. 60% of those revenues come from shoppers and businesses. So you're getting a great value in Roseville already for the way that we collect sales tax. We also made the point that the city receives less than a penny of each 7.25% sales tax we were receiving. People thought we got the whole 7.25%, and most of it goes to the state and county. Same with property tax, just a small fraction. We talked about what we did to control labor costs already, so people would know we have tightened our belt. And we talked about the distribution of our revenues and how those get applied towards general fund services. At the bottom of this one, and there's stuff on the other sides as well that's on our website, is where we illustrated the societal trends about consumer spending habits. So shopping at the store versus shopping online, that we get less than a penny. If you shop online, if you shop at the store, we get the full cent. Everybody has shopped online, and so that really hit home for people when we did presentations. When we talked about buying goods to buying services, the lawnmower was our favorite example, where everyone used to mow their own lawns, buy lawnmowers, buy all the equipment for that. That generated sales tax revenue. And now people hire services to do that on broader scales. And in California, services are not taxed. So there's a gap there that the city doesn't collect revenue on. We went out and asked the community, what do you think? And after each group presented to the Community Priority Advisory Committee, we went out to the community with the service levels or with the services and asked the community to rank their top 3 or their top 4, depending which department and the services we were asking about. So we were able to collect that information and break it up geographically, age-wise, and gender-wise when that came back. And this was very helpful to us to just give people an easy way to spend 2 minutes, which is the whole intent of Flash Vote, is that it's very quick to provide their input. They also could provide comments. And at the same time, 48 hours later when the poll closes, every single person who's participated gets a copy of the results. So it's not one of those things where you fill out a survey, you never hear about it again, or it's presented at some meeting that you don't attend. The community then stays engaged to see what the results were, and the transparency brought us a lot of credibility. We went on to Balancing Act, which Chris is going to go into in greater depth, and this was very helpful for us because we offered Balancing Act towards the end of this educational effort, so more towards the 7th month of this. So when all of these services that you'll see on the right had all been presented in video, podcasts, and public meetings to our community, so people had a greater idea of what that involved. And we said, you're in the city manager's seat now and you have a $2 million deficit to close. What are you going to cut? So we were able to, Balancing Act, I don't think Balancing Act had been used in this way before in terms of closing a deficit, but we were able to customize it for our needs and put in our little info boxes. When people click, they could see the consequence of cutting that service. They also had to balance it before they could submit it. They couldn't submit a budget with a deficit, and they also could not increase revenue because we did not have the ability to increase revenue without a vote to the public. So we didn't allow any of the participants to do that so that they could have a more realistic version of what it's like to sit in the city manager's seat and the council seat. We had a community conversation, which was very useful. On our direct mail piece that you saw a few slides earlier, we invited the entire community to come to a community conversation. We sent it out to all 60,000 households in our city so that nobody could say they didn't have a chance, again, to participate. And we listed all the different ways you could email and come to in-person meetings. So with this, we had staff people at each table facilitating conversations. We didn't want it to be kind of a testimony situation where any one person or group dominated, but we really wanted it to be collaborative. We had a facilitator who did an outstanding job getting people's input and running a meeting sift, which is what you see on the corner here. And we're going to do a video in a second. I think it's the next thing. This was our community conversation. So that was part of our effort to really show the community, reflect back what we heard. And we wanted people to understand that even if they couldn't come to these things, they happened. So your fellow community members have taken the time or were able to participate in these things and voted, and it was a really great experience. We had, if anyone's able to check out the SoundCloud podcast about it, really good feedback from the community. You know, we even included the skeptics in there. It wasn't just a straight PR piece. We wanted people to understand really how people came into the conversation and how they left. And there we go. And so with that, a report was generated. It was thousands of pages, and we presented that to City Council. But I will make a key point in saying that the thousands of pages had been presented throughout the entire 8-month process leading up to the report to City Council. So this wasn't like they had this big report landing on their desk. We kept posting all of the feedback from every survey and every outreach session as we went along. So none of this was a big surprise by the time the report came to City Council. One of the key things that came out of this was that people wanted to look for ways to raise revenue because they did not want to cut services any more than had been done. So the City Council gave the community that option by putting the half-cent sales tax measure on the ballot. And we came to Election Day in November 2018. So during this time that the measure went on the ballot, the city continued an educational campaign to make sure people understood what this was all about. So we had a roseville.ca.us/Measure B, which is still on our website, because we're still working on helping people understand how the money is being spent. So we had these FAQs that had drop-down menus, and we had facts about the measure as well, and about municipal finance. We sent out this direct mail piece to the community, and it had 2 sides that had all of that. We also invited people to open houses where they could ask anything they wanted. We had all the departments represented, the big general fund departments, in case they had any more questions about the measure or spending recommendations for that. The City Council also prioritized how they would spend money if this did come through. This was the information session. We did not have droves of people coming out. We think that's because people had a lot of questions answered by that time. It had been over a year that we'd been in the process of it, but it was good to answer the questions that remained. So the challenges that we had with this were, as I said earlier, we talked, well, actually, I don't think I said this. We talked about the need for broader outreach. We originally started out with having people thinking that we just needed to do a council-appointed committee. They would provide recommendations, and we'd go from there. We actually needed a much broader outreach in this day and age for transparency and the technologies available. There's a higher expectation of being able to provide input without attending meetings and without having all the time in the world to research things. So that was the basis for the amount of awareness that we did. We simplified the messages, which we're used to speaking government speak. How do we really relate this to people's everyday lives? And then the public perception about what we were doing, and how the city of Roseville would be viewed when would it still be viewed as a fiscally responsible. We tried to really emphasize that throughout, that this is part of our stewardship, is getting ahead of problems. Once it was put on the ballot, we were looking at, we had to walk that line of information versus advocacy. As public agency staff, we cannot advocate for political causes. So we really stayed on the information side and worked really closely with our attorney's office to do that, so there wouldn't be a misperception. And then we also talked about how much is too much. We didn't want to flood people's Facebook feeds with little posts about the whole effort, because we didn't want to turn them off. So we were really sensitive to being judicious with people's time and attention. We had great outcomes. We had a lot of information that we got back, a lot of trust in the community, from the community. And we also actually, another agency did a survey. We actually increased the trust and approval rating for Roseville's local government, while all of the cities around us decreased. And it was during the exact time frame we were doing this. So my takeaway from that is, don't be afraid to talk about the problems, because people believe you more when you're willing to be transparent. And I'm going to turn it over to Denis, our CFO, to talk about takeaways for the finance staff.
Thanks, Megan. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to briefly cover 3 key takeaways that our finance team found to be important in contributing to the overall success on the Engage Roseville effort. None of these takeaways for us were surprises or new concepts, but as we worked on the project, we quickly realized that placing a priority on these concepts was really important. The first takeaway was the importance of establishing a cross-organizational team to oversee the Engage Roseville effort. We made sure to involve the right people from the very beginning. The team that oversaw the project brought people together with the skills and experience to provide different perspectives on this project. The team included representatives from across the city, including the city manager's office, the executive team, finance staff, and operational departments. One aspect of this team that especially contributed to the overall success was the involvement of the communication team, headed up by Megan, who you just heard from. I would highly recommend involving your communications team when coordinating community engagement projects like this. They were a critical asset throughout the whole process. To keep the effort on schedule and on message, we maintained continuous communication by scheduling reoccurring meetings for the project team. These meetings helped maintain a clear sense of direction for the team. They also encouraged ownership by asking members of the team to agree on key objectives and messaging. By taking this approach, it secured the shared agreement on the direction of the program and helped contribute to commitment and supported collaboration. The second key takeaway was to focus on simplifying complex financial information, both for the benefit of the community and for city staff. Being in finance, we're often faced with explaining complex information to people that are unfamiliar with the financial topic. It's always tempting for us to act like subject matter experts and to share all that we know, but we always try to be aware that overloading the audience with information can be counterproductive and only create more confusion. We tried to strike that balance with Engage Roseville between keeping the message simple, but not too simple. Throughout Engage Roseville, we worked with our cross-organizational team to refine our messages based on the audience that was receiving the information. Examples of the questions that we consistently asked ourselves were things like, who are we talking to? How does this topic impact their daily lives? What do they already know about the subject already? And what gaps do we need to fill in along the way? Overall, we strove to ensure that the messages that we were conveying were laser focused on the audience's needs and experiences. As a group, we've always challenged each other to avoid jargon whenever possible. We have a lot of jargon in finance, as you know. We worked together to find alternative ways to explain information in a way that was both user-friendly and easier to understand. By not using jargon, it helped us build trust with the community, and I think it makes people feel like we're on the same team and that we have their best interests in mind. We also placed an emphasis on working with our communications team to develop ways that we could use images and words instead of numbers, as well as using metaphors and analogies to help take a complex idea and make it easier to digest. This helped ensure that our messaging provided people a point of reference by allowing them to draw on something that's familiar to them to make sense of something that's unfamiliar. For example, the mailers that Megan spoke about earlier were high on graphics and low on text and numbers. One of the mailers included a couple graphics on how new consumer spending habits have impacted the city's revenue. One graphic in particular used a then and now comparison to simply convey the financial impact on the city of shopping at a brick and mortar store versus shopping online. Another example was the use of simple and pared down pie charts. Rather than having charts that had many different slices of data, we worked with our communications team to pare down that information into more simple and easy to understand categories. We also were working hard to make sure that everyone involved in Engage Roseville used consistent metrics and messaging. This focus helped us strengthen trust and confidence when we worked with the community throughout the entirety of the process. Finally, we had a lot of success in strengthening community trust and collaboration by incorporating the feedback that we received from the Engage Roseville process into our budget documents and presentations. One example was the creation of the new budget and brief document that you see on this slide. This slimmed down version of the full budget document highlights the community priorities that were identified through the Engage Roseville process and showed how those priorities were used as a guide when we developed the budget. The document was distributed to all city staff, community groups, and we made it available at our public counters. The document outlines the ways in which community members can participate in the annual budget process, and it incorporated our other key takeaways of simplifying complex financial information, as you can see in some of the graphics that we included on this slide. Overall, this new document was very well received by our city council, and it's something that we're going to continue to produce in the future. The last point I wanted to highlight was that when the City Council considered the budget for adoption this year, we incorporated an overview of EngageRoseville and the efforts into the City Manager's budget presentation. It detailed how the priorities that were identified through EngageRoseville helped guide the list of services maintained, restored, and added in the annual budget process. So this concludes our case study presentation. We want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about EngageRoseville and hope you found this information helpful. And now I'm going to turn it back to Kim and Chris for the rest of the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan and Dennis. Excellent presentation. We've already got some questions coming in, so we look forward to coming back after Chris's session and moderating those. So with that, Chris, we'll turn it over to you.
Terrific. Well, Dennis and Megan, it's been really a pleasure to work with Roseville. Roseville has some of the best outcomes that we've seen, and I think it's evident to anybody who just heard that presentation, the care and thoughtfulness that you brought to it. Unfortunately, that's not typically the case. So we are students of public engagement on the budget and budget discussions and budget hearings and various forms of communicating and outreaching on the budget across the country and even into to Canada. And typically the budget is a difficult thing to engage the public on, even though it's seen as the budget is seen as being possibly the most important document, policy document of local government. It's just something that's hard to communicate. It's very long. Even for a smaller, medium-sized city, the budget is typically a couple hundred pages long. It's got numbers. It's just a very difficult thing. And so what I'm going to talk about, at least initially, is a little bit about kind of what the norm is and the challenges. And what you heard previously from the folks in Roseville is a fantastic example of overcoming them. And I've been involved now with the Alliance for Innovation for about 4 or 5 years now. And I think it's a great example that demonstrates that innovation works. One thing I've noticed is that innovation directionally can be generalized in a lot of different places. So that was the approach that worked for them. But what we're seeing is that in different places, different counties, cities, different sized places, different parts of the country, different structures, legal structures within the states, that sometimes these outreaches need to have a dose of innovation applied to every specific case. So currently, with citizen engagement on the budget, you've got things like PDFs available. There's budget hearings. I don't think anybody's a fan of those. Sometimes there's some types of hearings and meetings. Typically, those go not very well attended. A lot of entities use surveys, and we're very guarded about the use of surveys. There's a trend. There's been some analyses of budget surveys, and typically what you see is that people tend to love almost all services, or to at least be in favor of all services, and they tend to not be that happy about taxes. And so what that's led people to believe is that residents just aren't smart enough to know that things cost money. And we're working with actually a group of university-based local government researchers that are saying, no, that's actually the wrong conclusion. The problem is that budget surveys are just bad ways of understanding people's budget preferences and priorities, because they don't show the relationship between different choices and trade-offs of spending items, and they also don't show the relationship between spending and revenue. And so even though there might be a tendency to want to simplify things, and that's a good tendency, with budget you can oversimplify things. And I think people know that services cost money and that taxes pay for those. And so to be explicit about those and to deliberately show that connection is a very valuable thing. Citizen advisory committees are used in a lot of places, and I think that they're useful. But as Megan was saying, for the task that Roseville had, it was inadequate. And I think that they provide a little bit of benefit, but not that much. And then this last item of visualizations, that's something that is sort of big right now, to sort of visualize your budget and to show a lot of a lot of graphs and things like that. And there's some terrific software out there that will do that. What we found is that alone doesn't do too much, and in some places it raises significant questions about context and what things mean. And so while those are very useful, it's usually not enough. When taking a step back, I'm sort of going to be dancing between the perspectives of budget finance people and communications and public engagement types. Taking a look at kind of the traditional view that people have about public engagement, especially public engagement on the budget, is that the budget is just too complicated. People won't understand it. Typically, I hear from a lot of budget officers as, no one ever asks, the residents never ask me any questions, and that they interpret that to mean that everything's fine. And what I sense is that that's not necessarily the right interpretation of nobody asking any questions. What we think is that people see the budget as inaccessible, and that inaccessibility and that sort of dark hole that is the budget, this morass of numbers, it can actually breed distrust and contempt. And so we think that it's wise to actually proactively find ways for people to understand important parts of the budgets and to see those same trade-offs that you go through. We all know that conversations about money are hard, so that's just sort of overlies this whole issue of public engagement on the budget. And then the other thing I found, this breaks my heart, is that I talked to a lot of public officials, and they just sort of expect that the public is going to beat them up, and I just hate that. And so what I've seen is that they sort of just armor up and they say, I'll go to the hearing and it's going to be awful, and that's just the way it is. There was the budget director in Norfolk, Virginia. They were proposing a tax increase. They'd gone through a long process, sort of their own process, along the same lines as what Norfolk has done, and it led the city manager to believe that a tax increase would be appropriate. And so at the scheduled budget hearing, the budget director told his staff to show up and bring your budget books and plan on staying till 1 a.m. because we're gonna get pilloried tonight. And because they'd gone through such a good process, like Roseville did, they actually had about 3 people come, and they just kind of generally said, we don't like tax increases, and then they left. And so it was just a completely different type of conversation because they'd done so much work to educate and engage the community, and it sort of showed that you don't just have to armor up. That if you start the conversation with effective tools and at the right time, which is not at the budget hearing, you can actually have a completely different type of conversation. Just a couple, kind of funny slides to show what people typically see when they think about budget engagement and public engagement in general. So this is the angry mob coming after public officials because they don't trust government, or they don't like what government is doing, or they don't like taxes. This is the single issue people that don't show up for anything except for this very small issue of, in this case, it's Discovery Park. And that's one thing also that we believe is important is to certainly pay attention to single issues, but that's not even the beginning of the totality of what government does. Government does a lot. It's complex. It's got a lot of different concerns that it responds to. Single issues are important, but trying to encourage people to think about the bigger picture is a valuable thing. And then this is just an example of kind of a traditional budget hearing. If you can read the headline, it says another instance of low turnout at school budget hearing. So even in places, especially in the eastern part of the country, where residents need to approve budgets, whether the school budgets or city budgets, there's often very low attendance, and we think that that's a shame. So, and I also want to say that I think we're at a tipping point. So I've been doing a little bit of work with GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, in the last couple of years to sort of recognize the possibility of new tools that can really sort of change things and be a game changer, and in the context of some broader strategies can really help to make the budget something that can be discussed. This is an article from last year from the Government Finance Review, and it circled the technology and public involvement in the budget. This was an article that I wrote with one of the staff at GFOA, Mark Mack, and if you're interested in it, it's under the Handouts tab on your little GoToMeeting control panel. But it sort of traces the history of doing public engagement on the budget and what's been tried and what hasn't been tried. And then, beginning in about early 2000, a number of cities tried doing simulations using paper and pencil. They had good success with it, but they were very time intensive, very staff intensive. Then moving forward to 2007, that's when we did our first online budget simulation. We did it for the state of Colorado, and then a couple of local governments did it. Baltimore did it, Johnson County, Kansas, and a few other places, sort of created their own versions of it in the early 2010s. And now we're starting to see a number of really good cloud solutions that can sort of make this tool available that can be a critical part in terms of having that good conversation with residents about financial issues and budget issues. Speaking of from the perspective of budget finance professionals, there's an exciting initiative going on right now. There is the Online Financial Transparency Task Force is preparing to make some recommendations about how to go forward in this time when the internet is sort of ubiquitous. You've got resident citizen expectations that information is available, and even adding on to that not just that information is available, but that they have an opportunity to participate and weigh in and interact in some ways. And so I don't think that the board has officially approved this yet, but this is the work product of a task force at GFOA, and I'll just sort of hit the highlights of some of those recommendations on the right. They're beginning to recommend using simulations, focus on two-way communication, so it's not just enough to sort of push information out, that there's the opportunity to have a more interaction. They're stressing participation, stressing the opportunity to have in-person opportunities. Context is critically important. It's not just enough to give people information. Kind of the massive PDF is not something that is that useful. And so you need to find ways to sort of explain things to people so that they understand what's going on. And then also, and this is an important one, to convey constraints, because a lot of times people will say, well, gosh, if we just cut the city manager's office out of the budget, we would have all the money we need, and in most places that's be a minuscule cut, and it wouldn't solve the problems, and you wouldn't have a city manager. So trying to find ways of providing context, trying to let people know about state laws, like in California, where you have to have a vote of the people to increase the tax. A number of other places you have to do that, Washington, Colorado, a number of places. So really trying to let people know that some things can't be done, and so it helps them be good problem solvers with you. This is just one of those magic quadrant graphs that is in the report that's coming from GFOA, and if you look, everybody wants to be in the upper right quadrant. So they talk about having drillable, searchable data, having those constraints, once again, using budget simulations, timely, accurate, and context. In terms of the in-person stuff, we're here at Balancing Act. We're fans of the possibility of using online communication and sort of the newest and most the richest type of interaction online that you can get, and to be honest, it's getting better and better. But we also like face-to-face interactions. And so even though, and I'm going to demonstrate Balancing Act for you in just a moment, one of the things that we wanted to make sure about when we created an online simulation was that there was an ability to use it face-to-face too. So we created this thing called meeting mode. And so if you look, I'm going to show you this in a sec, but this guy with his phone, he's got a version of this is Kansas City's simulation that he's doing, and she's doing it on the laptop, and there's kind of various people using devices. But one thing just to stress, we often hear from budget finance people within cities that that it's too complicated, and I'm not really sure I trust the public to sort of weigh in on these complicated issues, and besides it is money, and that's a contentious issue, and I also don't know if they would make good decisions. And what we found is that when you provide a simulation and people see the trade-offs, they see the totality of what spending is happening, and they see the tax structure, that they tend to make really reasonable cogent responses, and they in some ways they tend to put themselves in the shoes of policymakers, which is a good place for them to be, because they respond to the constraints, and they almost invariably at the aggregate level come out very close to what a proposed budget is, or what a budget finance officer, city manager, or an elected official might think would be a reasonable outcome. And I love this quote from this guy. He's no longer at Kansas City, but Adam Blom, where he was observing this group of people that were doing the simulation, where he says, the amazing thing is that residents are almost silent as they go through the exercise because they're concentrating so hard on making these decisions. The next slide I want to show you is just a picture of 400 people using the simulation at once, and up here on the screen they're using meeting mode here as well. So they're doing they're using using the simulation at their tables, but then they get to see the results up here. And I wanted to show you this slide because this is actually an internal staff. This is a very large nonprofit. It's a big community health center, and this is an all-hands meeting. And their CEO wanted to get buy-in, wanted the staff to have buy-in to the mission. We're beginning to see more city managers and county managers and school district CFOs and COOs and superintendents wanting to not just use balancing act with the public, but use it internally to get some buy-in to weigh in on some trade-offs and to get some sense of what staff think would be wise budget decisions. But I wanted to show you some quotes. So this is a quote from their VP for Finance. And once again, you can understand why the person in this position might be reluctant. But she says, we want people to understand the why. This was a great introduction of the types of choices that need to be made. Often staff simply say they want money for something new, that we need to hire another person, et cetera, but they don't understand the impact of the entire organization and why we can't just do that. And I'm not going to go over this one. This is just some quotes from staff. I'm going to keep on going because I think I'm getting short on time. But staff essentially took it very seriously too, and they made very reasonable decisions. In some cases, they even chose to increase operating reserves as opposed to providing an extra salary increase to them. Now I want to talk a little bit about the perspective of communication and engagement professionals. And Kim, if you could take control and show this video. This comes from Lynchburg, Virginia. And it's a local TV piece that accompanied the launch of that city's budget simulation. All right. So that was actually, they had two different stations producing stories on the Lynchburg budget, which was just terrific. And it's not just a small town thing. In the Washington, D.C. media market about 6 weeks ago, they had a story on Montgomery County's launch of another of our tools called Taxpayer Receipt. The mayor of Pittsburgh was on their CBS station asking residents to provide input. It's something, it's a great way of generating a positive budget story and sort of focusing the conversation where it's most useful. I'm going to give you a very, very short demo. I just want to show you an example of how this can be used. It's a little bit different than the one that was on the TV piece. This is Dubuque, Iowa. They've done a terrific job with using this and doing their budget simulation. This is from their finance page, and they have it in English and Spanish, and you can click on this and you can see their version. And what I wanted to show you is just kind of the different options to use balancing act and to weigh in on trade-offs. So in this case, they're trying to decide what to do with the Five Flags Civic Center, and so they asked the question, what option should we be selected? The one that they've got by default is a demolition of it, and you can click on here and get some additional information about it and why that might be a wise thing. Or you can go up here and you can say, I think I might want to actually save it, but maybe spend a little bit smaller amount. And once again, there's all sorts of ways to take a look at what this would be and how it would look. And so if you make the selection, in this case, it takes the 1-year cost and does the arithmetic over here, and it puts you in the deficit. One thing that we found is important to finance professionals is to have both this type of question where you can show consequences and trade-offs, but there's a lot of parts of the budget that, I don't want to say that they're untouchable, but that don't necessarily need to have a lot of public input and engagement because they're recurring costs, or there just isn't a big choice point in that area. And so we have very simple plus minus for that. So I think I'm going to just skip ahead now. Kim, let's just do this last slide just so that we have time for a conversation here. So that was from City of Stillwater, Oklahoma, and the point there is that even though budgets might seem humorless, that the public engagement on them doesn't have to be, and that there are some ways to sort of make it as attractive as a cute, cuddly puppy. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Chris and Megan and Dennis. I do have a few questions, so want to make sure that as I switch my screen over, I give you guys the opportunity to start responding. So first, a couple specific questions for the Roseville team. Interest in knowing how you chose Flash Vote versus other programs to get that community feedback. So if you wanted to speak to that quickly. And Megan, you are still muted, so just want to make sure you. There you go.
Great. Okay. Yes. So Flash Vote was already being used by Placer County, the county that we're in. So there was a really good base of participants already from our city, which gave us a springboard for starting. We also liked that we could do something quick. We could do something that with working with professionals in the survey area who would word it so that we don't inadvertently word questions in a way that seems biased. That was very important to us. And then the level of participation was a statistically valid number. So that was also important to us, and that's how we chose Flash Vote.
Excellent. Thank you for those considerations for folks looking to integrate something like that. Another specific question was there were comments received that your visuals and your graphics were very well done, very effective, and interested in knowing if you did that in-house or if you used outsourcing to produce those.
We did all of our graphics and videos in-house. We have a very talented graphic designer, but also while designing isn't my expertise or a public information officer's expertise, communicating concepts is. So we worked very closely with them and with our finance staff to make sure that we followed those principles of simplification and such. We also have a videographer on staff. We're very fortunate for that because we run our own news or television station, Government Access, that broadcasts our meetings. And we have another person on staff who has background in broadcast and doing podcasts. So he took out the ums and ahs from anybody's stuff and made us all sound very eloquent. So we're very fortunate that we have that level on staff, or else we wouldn't have been able to do that magnitude of communication.
Wonderful. I have a couple of questions, and maybe for this first one, Chris, we'll start with you from kind of the big picture of what you've seen, and then maybe Roseville, you can speak to your specific experience, but looking to integrate this type of community engagement process and tool and feedback, You know, most communities have kind of a set budget schedule. Do you see that communities using this type of approach have to expand the length of their budget preparation process? And Chris, we'll start with you and then let the Roseville team talk about what they did.
Oh, I'd say not at all. It fits very well within a 1 year or a 2 year budget cycle. What we've seen that works best is so there's a couple of reasons why you might use balancing act. What we've seen that works best is if you create a version of the simulation maybe 5 or 6 months into your fiscal year, so about halfway through, kind of after you've got a sense of, some rough revenue projections and some big picture items that you might have out there, and that's an opportunity for you to sort of share that with the public and get some feedback on, are these valuable services, and are they, where do they fit in the priorities compared to other services that you're doing, and also would there be a willingness to pay. So going back to Norfolk, their city council had given the city manager and the budget office some priorities. It was non-sexy things like stormwater improvements, building sidewalks, some incentive pay for senior firefighters and senior police officers. And they said these are important things. And so they put them on balancing act and explained what they were. And what they found was that people, when they understood what the proposed priority in spending would be, they chose not to make cuts from other things, but they actually chose to increase their taxes a little bit in order to pay for those things.
Wow, great. And Megan and Dennis, how about your process timing?
Oh, I was just going to add, Kim, that for us, we run it concurrent and open it up for about 2 weeks for balancing act, 2 weeks or a month. I know Chris has an idea of what's been working best in communities, and so it didn't delay it. It was an additional way to gather input. The other thing we had to face was that our folks who do budget, we had to let them know these aren't exact numbers like they're used to providing. We were doing some ballpark numbers in some area, and what it gave us, the feedback gave us an idea of what priorities were, or percentages that were priorities. So this wasn't meant to be an accounting exercise, but more of a priority setting exercise. So we had to explain that to staff.
Gotcha.
Also, just to add that another very high profile time to use balancing act is when the city manager, the county manager proposes the budget and sets it out for public comment and for council deliberation. That's actually the balancing act can be a great way of explaining what the proposal is and sort of embedding as the baseline the proposal, and then letting people learn about that and say how they might do things differently, but also holding people accountable for the constraints that they have, namely that you can't spend more than you have.
Excellent. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question here before we just wrap up quickly. There was a mention about showing the impact of decisions or potential cuts that were recommended in the case of Roseville, and just interested in how you went about gathering that or presenting that to the community as far as what those trade-offs would be.
That's a great question. You saw when Chris ran through the demo, you could click on that little eye icon. I would say for us, and this has nothing to do with balancing out, but that was the hardest piece of the communication, was communicating the consequences of cutting roadway funding or fire safety inspections or goats eating the grass to prevent fires. How do we communicate things in a way that's understandable? Some of this stuff really has to do with regulations and policies. How do we make that relevant to people's lives? We spent a lot of time on that, and that was very impactful for people to go, oh, that's what that means. Okay, well, maybe I don't want to cut that, or I don't want to cut that as much. So that's how it was. Our budget staff, me, and our city manager talking about what those descriptors would be. We spent a lot of time on this effort.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation from everybody. This is something, of course, our communities deal with across the country. So really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. Just a couple comments as we close out. First of all, don't forget that in the handouts, you have the presentation deck as well as some of those articles that Chris mentioned. You will also receive those in your follow-up email, which usually comes about 48 hours after our session wraps. So if you have any questions or need any other information or think of a question that you want to get to our panelists, Please feel free to contact the Alliance at learning@transformgov.org at any time. We're happy to help you. Also, save the date for events. The best way to keep in touch is by going to our events page or following us on social. You see on here a couple in-person events that we have to supplement our virtual learning piece. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you to everybody who participated today. The Alliance Network exists because of our members and those willing to come and share what they're doing and what's working and lessons learned. And that's really how we can build our thriving communities through transforming local government. So appreciate everyone. As you exit, there will be a very short survey. We would really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to fill that out, as that just helps us make sure that we are meeting your needs here at the Alliance. So thank you again to our panelists, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.